On today's episode, we're answering the question, no, we're not, because I'm on the wrong damn outline.
Yes, if you're a solopreneur, more than any other state or structure of a business, but if you're by yourself and you're really doing everything, then live streaming is a great opportunity to be efficient and get that done more quickly, right? And so is there an opportunity to outsource some stages of that? Yes, there is. But I just think that there is something to be said for the efficiency, especially as a solopreneur. It is more of a case by case basis, right? We have to analyze so many different factors to decide what is going to be the best structure for my show. So in my case, I'm on a lot of calls. I'm doing a lot of other things aside from my show. I'm actually running really an agency, So I have to really take that into consideration and say, okay, what is doable so that I can get the result that I'm looking for, but also fitting within the constraints of, a work day, so that I'm not working myself to the bone, right? So that I have a life and that I can still do the things that I want to do with my family, et cetera. So I think it's not a cookie cutter approach, but more so an analysis and an audit of your own situation, and then deciding, does this fit within the life I'm trying to design?
Yes, I can't say yes enough. So if you have questions about that, just hit rewind and listen to the last minute, because that's that important.
Right?
The other thing, the other thing that you said was revenue generating. So I want to talk about this idea of your show and, like, does it really drive sales? How does it do that? Can you give some examples of what that might look like?
Sure. Does it drive sales directly? I'm not so sure, right? Can it? Yes, of course it can. There can be that situation where you create an episode on a specific topic and a person hears you from someplace else in the world on a podcast, and they say, this is my person, and they call and you have a sales call and there you go. That can happen. Of course it can happen. But more often than not, what I really think the show format does for a business owner or an entrepreneur is it's making people aware that you exist, right? The brand awareness is really one of the first steps in the whole journey of client relationship, right? We have to walk through those stages of the customer journey, and brand awareness is the first stage. You can't get to the consideration or to the decision phase if you are not aware that that person exists and can help you solve your problems. So is it a direct correlation? It can be, but more often than not, it's about opening up that brand awareness, but also more importantly, building trust, right?
Trust is huge.
Trust is huge. And that may need to happen over the course of time. So if you are doing something engaging and you launch a show and the format is right for the lifestyle that you're designing, and maybe it does have a live component, and you're repurposing all of that, and you might need to maybe it takes 5 episodes before that one person hears something that makes them go, ding, I just heard the thing I needed to hear. And now I'm ready to reach out, to go to the website and book the call or whatever that next step is, and opt into the thing and look into what it is that this person is doing. So I think it's more about driving awareness, building trust, which then leads to conversations and subsequently sales if you're doing it properly.
I completely agree with that. So full transparency, I had a quote unquote show. I was doing a weekly video on my Facebook page and, did it for a number of months. And then for whatever reason, I stopped. So I'm not really proud of that, but I'm very much encouraged by what you're saying today to actually re-begin. But what I want to ask you is, how are people going to get started with this? If they're sold, they're listening to this right now and you love what Sheryl is saying, how are you going to get started? How often do we need to do this so that it's not overwhelming and taking up all of our time, like you mentioned before?
Okay. I think if you have, a system that's efficient, you can effectively do an episode per week. And I do think that's the minimum that we kind of want to look toward. We do want to do at least an episode per week. You can do more, certainly. The more efficient your system is, the more that you can, have more episodes. But let's just say, as a blanket statement, aiming for once per week is the minimum that you really want to do. why is that important? Well, it's important because you want to consistently be in front of the people who you're trying to build trust with. And if you let 4 weeks, 5 weeks go by and they haven't heard from you, you're not in their world anymore. You're not in their consciousness. You're not in front of them. They're not aware. So I think it's important to have at least that once per week type of cadence and pattern, schedule that you can adhere to. But the more efficient it can be, your system can be, the more episodes that you can produce. So I don't know if that answers your question, Jenny. The idea of once per week, I think, is really paramount.
I do
But
too.
beyond that, you mentioned something interesting about how you were doing the Facebook Lives and you were being consistent, but then you stopped. Sometimes, well, not sometimes, this often happens where people maybe are not getting the right results that they want, or they're kind of questioning, gee, I'm putting all this effort in and I'm not really getting anything. Typically what happens there is you want to look at, well, what is the key message that I'm driving? Is that clear? Is that aligned to the things that I'm selling? And so from a starting perspective, I think it begins with an analysis. And like I said, some sort of audit of what is it that you're trying to do? And you'd be surprised to learn in most cases, when I get on calls or I'm talking to people or consulting, that clarity isn't always there. So we have to kind of start at that place and say, okay, what is the goal that we're trying to drive here? And now we start to reverse engineer that and say, okay, well, then let's do it this way. We're building this, and this message is coming into play in this particular case.
Jenny and I actually do that pretty regularly with this podcast. We say, what's our goal for this? Not just as far as the message that we're putting out in the world, because we do have goals and visions and things that we want to achieve just as messaging, but what do we ultimately want to get from this? And how are we doing with that? I think not just what do I want, but how's that going for you? Right?
Well, you know what, Allison, it's so interesting because that message can change over time. And something that happens, I think, in entrepreneurship, especially with people who are starting out, they're afraid to stick to a message because they don't want to be pigeonholed into that, let's say 5 years from now. Gee, I don't want to do that video because I might believe this now, but what if I change my mind? What if my ideals change? What if my point of view changes? And I say, expect that to happen. It should happen. I think if you're really out there and you're involved and you're out, being seen and doing a podcast and being on other people's podcasts, your point of view probably should change over time. So it solidifies the idea further of saying, well, we need to reanalyze what the point is of all of this, because of the fact that your point of view, your ideals, your opinion, your belief system may change over time. So it's something I think you need to do regularly.
One of the things that I think probably contributes to, and in the podcasting world, it's called pod fading, and maybe in the live stream show world, it's show fading or something. But one of the things that I think contributes to it is kind of just running out of things to say and not knowing what to talk about anymore, especially if you're not getting the audience feedback and that kind of participation to help you get that cycle. Right? So how do we figure out that content that we want to put out there? How do we know what's right?
I think it's stepping into the thought leadership space and drawing a line in the sand and saying, I am going to position myself and I'm going to put myself out there as a thought leader. So what does that mean? Well, it means that you have an opinion. It means that you are reading about what's going on in your industry. You're reading articles. You're consuming other people's content, not with the intent of comparing yourself to them, but more so from a knowledge perspective. Understand what's going on in your industry. And so once you really do that and make that a practice, maybe even a daily practice where you read an article every day, or, if we look at some of the top CEOs in the world, that's what they're very well read. They're reading all the time. So think of yourself, you are the CEO of your business. So act accordingly. And I think it's taking that thought leadership approach. Once you do that and you really are in it and you understand what's going on in your industry and you're learning new things, now all of a sudden content really becomes, I say, easier because you have so many topics. If anything, it becomes a case of having to narrow it down and not having to scratch the bottom of the barrel to come up with a topic. So I think it is all about thought leadership and having opinions and ideals, is one of the key tenets, I suppose, of not ever getting stuck in a place where you don't know what to say.
In addition, go ahead.
Sorry,
please.
Jenny. I just wanted to say one other thing about that. And that is that when you have your own show, you don't have to have all the answers, right? Mm-hmm. Your guest is going to be able to fill in a lot of the gaps. So just as we're doing here, you're asking me questions and I'm answering. When I have my show and I have one later today, I'm going to ask my guests questions, they're going to answer. So it becomes a collaborative effort between you and the guest so that you don't have to feel the weight of the world on your shoulders to come up with all the answers.
My nostrils were flaring. I know.
Stop. Okay.